Duas coisas que gostaria que vocês vissem assim com melhores olhos, mas é claro que é uma coisa que toca um arquiteto que se dedica aqui na escola aos estudos de projeto e dedica um pouco a vida a isto, e que é um admirador da obra teórica e do Frampton, mas uma coisa que toca muito é saber que ele, logo no início da carreira, enquanto trabalhava em Londres na Architectural Design, editando a revista, ele também trabalhava fazendo projetos de arquitetura, e tem um prédio em Londres que eu quero muito visitar, que é um prédio de apartamentos de 8 andares, que foi inaugurado em 1962. E que ele descreve ainda o corte desse prédio de um jeito muito bonito, muito entusiasmado. E a outra coisa, então, comentar um Frampton antes, que é isso que eu queria dizer, e um Frampton que é os trabalhos que ele está armando de agora para frente. Que é como pela inserção de uma quarta parte no livro dele, que todos conhecemos, não, a Critical History, não, da Modern Architecture. Ele está fazendo um quarto capítulo, e que, nas palavras deles, é um pouco para quebrar o eurocentrismo que marca o livro desde a sua primeira edição. Então, está extremamente dedicado a escrever uma parte nova, que ele está chamando dessa quarta parte, incluindo um estudo muito mais detalhado sobre a América Latina. Claro que o Brasil é parte, desde Warszawski, depois toda a arquitetura moderna, mas também a África, também a Ásia, também o Oriente Médio. Então, vai juntar uma série de coisas, e muito interessante, porque ontem ele visitou, não é, com o Eduardo Ferroni, o Pablo Erenhu, o Sesc Pompeia, da Lina Bobardi, e comentou comigo que a Lina não estava no livro e que agora ele vai precisar incluir mais coisas. Então, também muito comovente ver o entusiasmo dele com as coisas que ainda não viu, e essa disposição de ver e de estar aqui conosco. Então, tenho uns agradecimentos para fazer. O primeiro agradecimento, é claro, é para o Frampton, porque ele foi trazido aqui para o Docomomo, e ele sugeriu que a vinda dele tivesse o desdobramento de fazer uma palestra para nós aqui na FAU. Então, temos que agradecer à própria FAU, o apoio da Mariângela, o apoio aqui da Maria Cristina, que me orienta aqui em cada passo, para essas coisas que são muito importantes para nós, o Lira, que também nos acompanhou até na recepção para o Frampton na segunda-feira, mas agradecer a Beatriz Capello, que é professora na Escola de Arquitetura de Uberlândia e que foi organizadora do Docomomo, e foi a Beatriz Capello que fez possível a vinda do Kenneth Frampton, com apoio financeiro do CAL. Então, são as coisas que não aconteceriam se não fossem assim. Então, por favor, muito obrigado, hein?
Yeah, hello. I'm a little overwhelmed by this occasion because of all of you and Angelo's introduction and this building altogether. It's a lot. And what I want to present is not so clear because it's a mixture of, well, two lectures, in fact. The one I wrote for the Docomomo in Uberlandia, but then I didn't give it because I thought, because actually Bia Capello really wanted me to talk about this book, A Genealogy of Modern Architecture, and these first images will be from that book, but, and I used that there, and I had, yes, and I had the idea to talk about something else here. Anyway, so this is a mixture of two lectures basically together, and I kept something from the first lecture to do with the book, Genealogy of Modern Architecture, which has that title because of Lars Müller, the publisher in Zurich, because in fact it's a record of a course that I gave for many years, both in Columbia and also in London in the Royal College of Art, which was this idea of comparing two buildings that were for the same program, I mean the same pragmatic program. And, but from two buildings well known and from a kind of quite different ideological standpoint. And yes, and so this course was entitled Comparative Critical Analysis, where always a sequence of buildings were taken, pairs of buildings that were answering the same program and but from a different point of view. Of course, different buildings, not exactly the same program, but of the same generic program. And well, I found, the reason for the course was, actually it has an interesting history because, for me anyway, personally, I started to teach in the States in '65, and somewhere around '66, '67, I'm not sure exactly when, I was asked to give to do a seminar on a big title, Values, Concepts, and Methods. And I didn't know what to do with that title. And so the first semester I gave students books to read that I thought was somehow relevant, you know, theoretical texts, and so on. And then the next semester I completely had nothing, no ideas anymore. And so I got them to analyze buildings, so-called analyzed buildings. And then it dawned on me that if you analyze something, you know, you get more and more information about the one thing, but you don't have, that's it. It's a sort of tautology. And so I thought if you compare two buildings that are from different, clearly different ideological points of departure, then you know, you get this sameness, or rather similarity and difference. And I thought that becoming aware of similarity and difference was a way to understand how, you know, buildings could embody, signify, embody meaning, cultural meaning. It's not as though the analysis was anything scientific at all. It was just a kind of cultural sort of consciousness raising, maybe, you know. That's the idea behind it. And, but it's necessary to say one other thing which is somehow very critical and which, whether I like it or not, I'm stuck with it because this German political philosopher, Hannah Arendt, wrote a book in '58 with the title The Human Condition. And I read this book when I went to the States. It's a coincidence that the two things together. And, but then I thought this book has, you know, for me, you know, was so illuminating and so revealing that I would never think the same way again, neither about the architecture nor the world in general, I think. so actually, this book and this writer is anyway in the States enjoying a certain revival, but the text, The Human Condition for me was, and is still, quite fundamental. And one of the big issues to talk about it in any detail would take another complete lecture by itself, and I'm not going to do that. But the main thing is that she distinguishes between two ideas, and two words, really. One is work, and one is labor. And then she defines work as the state of affairs in which that which is produced is not intended for consumption, and labor the opposite. That which is produced is intended for consumption. And then it struck me that these two words that in everyday life, of course, it sometimes creates confusion because this difference between architecture and building, for example, and that's one thing. The other thing is that for her, work is public, is what this lecture hall is at this moment, and the school is, for that matter, the whole school is a space, she uses this term, space of human appearance, which she gives it also a political connotation. I suppose basically a kind of democratic space, really. But also a celebratory public representational space. So that, the public side and the architecture side is all moving towards this space of appearance, and the other side, the work side and the idea of process, is moving towards building. And the interesting thing is that architecture is unquestionably a noun, and building is a gerund, and architecture is kind of stasis, really, would be stasis, and building is process. Yes, it's a bit much. I mean, she doesn't mention a word of architecture in the entire book, but I think, actually I once met her, and I gave something like that, to a conference where she was present, and afterwards I sort of got some kind of grudging, a feeling from her that, okay, yeah, I think it works. This analogy, really, is a question of making an analogy between her political philosophy and the issue of architecture. And the reason why I find I need to explain it is that this comparative analysis, which I will briefly show because of this emphasis upon public and private, because I use that really as a sort of primary dialectic difference in the analysis. So these analyses were sort of typical. I use them again and again, but they changed all the time. But they always began with these two houses, which I suppose I should finally shut up and show. And this is it's all familiar, of course. It's the Rietveld Schroeder House, Utrecht, by Rietveld, of course, but very much influenced by the theory of Dutch neoplasticism and De Stijl. And then, and it's 1924, it relates polemically, ideologically, to Van Doesburg's 16 points of a plastic architecture, and the opposite is 1926, Le Corbusier, Maison Cook, outside Paris, which relates to his 5 points of a new architecture. And so this kind of avant-garde opposition begins the whole story. And then the buildings are, this building, but then the sequence of buildings compared are always analyzed at the level of the site plan. So here, of course, obvious difference is that the Utrecht house is at the edge of a, I don't think this makes any sense, this pointer, does it? No, I turned it all off, very good. And, okay, and so, as opposed to the Maison Cook, which is then, a frontalized building set in a terrace, so it's it's different spatial idea, but also different contextual idea. And then the buildings are analyzed comparatively. Here, the different plans of the Rietveldt-Schroeder house. These are pages from the book where blue equals public, yellow equals private, gray equals service, which are, of course, bathrooms and very small kitchens, for example, but also small elevators and, all service spaces. Spaces in which, the human subject enters and leaves, usually as quickly as possible. Whereas, a kind of large space, which is also a bathing space and has a jacuzzi and God knows what, is perhaps is more correct to think of it as private, because it's not a space that you it's not just used for the purpose of servicing the body, I mean. And so, then the plans and sections of, this is still Rietveldt-Schroeder house, are analyzed for this public-private service, etc. And of course, the Maison Cook, the same, which has on this image, it's the first floor after the rez-de-chaussée, and it is, it's, as you probably know, given over almost entirely to bedrooms, with a bathroom in one corner, and then above, of course, the 2 stories of the upper level, so the living space is double height, and it links up to the terrace and a little library on the terrace, etc. So it has, well, it's quite different from the Rietveldt-Schroeder house pinwheel plan, but it also has a kind of rotating circulation. And so then I'm just showing it fast because it's trying to show, what was the, if you like, what was the method? And here, this comparison, say on the left, is the Rietveldt-Schroeder interior drawn by Rietveld, and on the right is a photograph of the main living space of the Maison Cook, and then there is these images of the double height of the Maison Cook, 2 different images of it, and also the upper level, which opens out to the roof terrace. And then this contrast of windows, for example, the fact that the Maison Cook has these long sliding windows, which for him was 1 point, and the Rietveldt-Schroeder house has these hinged windows that open out, very, very wide windows that also follow the kind of the idea of plastic rotating planes. So these, in a way, if one reduces it to the avant-garde of the modern movement, these 2 poles can be seen as quite opposite. And then, I also pushed this analysis to construction, to the difference between structure and membrane. So basic load-bearing walls are shown in red here. But actually, in this case, of course, it's a wood-framed building. And in Le Corbusier case, it is a concrete, with concrete block, which then is covered over to make it look as though it's all one material. And then also to go into the kind of the details behind the way the buildings are detailed, and also the use of color. They both are buildings, of course, related to painting. Here, to this counter composition of Van Doesburg, Van Eastern, and here, well, here it's showing something else. It's showing actually Le Corbusier's Voyage d'Orient in 1912, where the map of Europe, which was tracing his voyage, Europe and the Near East, you probably know it, but he first publishes it in 1925 and distinguishes between F for folklore, I for industry, and C for culture, which I choose to interpret as classic, but he doesn't actually write classic. And then the space difference and the furniture, of course, in relation to the idea, what the worldview that's embodied in the painting, and of course, in this case, 1920 classic painting by Le Corbusier, which is sort of quintessentially purist painting. This whole opposition between purism and neoplasticism. The fact that purism is not only an idea of painting, but is also a kind of a theory of civilization, in fact. It relates to the map, folklorique, industrie, classique, and you know, the Thorney chair, for example, which, of course, you know all this, but it is kind of quintessential civilization, universal civilization. In fact, the chair is exported all over the world, first produced by industrial processes in the middle of the 19th century, 1851. So that is, this is the first chunk of stuff that from the a lecture which would go on and on about this business, and I will not go on anymore. And I want to, this is actually a page from an amazing book that is published in 1940 by Swiss architect Alfred Roth. And in this book, there are 20 buildings. The book is entitled The New Architecture. And the reason I'm going back to it, I mean, I knew this book when I was a student. You know, it was already a kind of a reference point for students of my generation in the first half of the 50s. And I think we saw it as some kind of anthology of actually all the buildings, all the 20 buildings were built between 1935 and 1940. They were all, yeah, they are all in that time period. And the emphasis, although they show the photographs of the architects, actually this is Lawrence Kocher and Albert Fry. It's a small house built on Long Island around 1935. And so they show, like this, for example, are the three architects for two apartment buildings built in Zurich. Actually, the client is Siegfried Gideon, and the architects are Alfred Roth, Emil Roth, Swiss-German architects, and Marcel Breuer. And these twin apartment buildings shown here, I think are, you know, small masterpieces, actually. And I even think that this is the most, what can I say? The most kind of sensitive, humanist residential work that Marcel Breuer ever is involved with. Because, of course, soon after this, he goes to the States and builds God knows how many houses. They are, you know, they are very much associated with his name. And, but I think none of these houses are as delicate as this, these two buildings, which also suggest, you know, that they are part of, could be part of a serial production. And they have this, you know, the integration of automobiles for two apartments. They're tiny apartment blocks. In fact, Stanislas von Moos lives in one of these still now, I think. And, oh yes, should go back. This, I mean, this kind of, well, the combination of of course, the Le Corbusier pilotis and steel-framed, you know, plate glass windows and exotic plants in the main entrance hall of the building. And then this use of sunblinds, yeah, that's an amazing thing because, you know, people used sunblinds in Europe in the 30s. But then after this, forget about it. You know, they don't use sunblinds anymore, mostly not, I think. And very intelligent, you know, modification of a building, you know, during the summer, etc. Why we, it's always an interesting question. Why do we abandon some techniques and keep others, you know, very unclear. So this is the kind of an interior. It's in fact the interior of Alfred Roth's apartment. Then this is all pages from the same book for the same two apartments. Then all the details are are shown very precisely, very Swiss, and it combines, this sort of you could say Teutonic technological precision with this kind of more humanist attitude, and they also include this complex, or actually earlier, 1932, outside Zurich again, so-called Neubüll-Siedlung, still there, which is a well, the interesting thing here is the great difference in this work made by a whole group of architects, in fact, from, the German existence minimum of the Weimar Republic mass housing between 1923 and 1933. This is already something different. The way it is organically inflected because of the landscape. You see it here very clearly, I think. And so it's actually partly the same architects, because Emil Roth, who worked on the Doldertal apartments of 35, was then also here as architect in 32. I think you can see, for instance, the garden, these terraces, also again, the sun blind, the use of shutters, timber shutters, which you also use here, I think, have used. And I think this kind of humanism is coming off the, in modern architecture critical history, there are big gaps. One of the huge gaps is not to mention Stockholm 1930, because this exhibition that was supervised, conceived in a way by Gunnar Asplund, is a fundamental sort of social democratic exhibition. 1930, 1 year later, the Social Democrats go to power in Sweden, and they stay there until, when is it, the mid-70s something, when Palme is actually assassinated in the streets of Stockholm, and the politics of Sweden start to change. And, well, there's an image of, images of this exhibition, and I think it is this exhibition that softens the kind of dogmatic functionalism of the interwar period, and had, in my opinion, has this impact on the Swiss. And Alto, writing of this exhibition, says this exhibition is not about didactic architecture, but it's about white tablecloth, flags, flowers, and happy people. It's a bit of a sentimental thing, but, and then these are plates, of course, of the Aino Marcio, the wife of Alto, and Alto's Viperi library, which was just recently restored. And what I think is very impressive about this plan is the way the public, it's hard to show without a pointer, and I can't seem to make this thing work. No, okay, that, the entrance, there is, in fact, there's a kind of access that runs through the building, and as you probably know, and on one side is a very kind of public entrance, and which leads immediately into the lecture hall. On the other side, the children enter the children's library, and it has an extraordinary organic plan. It has, of course, this organic acoustic ceiling over the lecture hall. And all of this material, it's all from the new architecture of Roth, as this is, it is two French architects, Baudouin and Lodz. This is a special school, kind of in a way, a school for tubercular children made outside Paris. Also, I think it's also 35. It's in a suburb called Suresnes, still there, I think, where the children enter from the upper level and they go down into these pavilion classrooms where these doors open up so that it basically gives the possibility of giving classes in open air. So this question of open air is also part of that period. And here, this furniture, daybed, I think is almost certainly by Jean Prouvé, although the book does not acknowledge the fact that this was by Jean Prouvé. And also in this book, we have this famous factory by Owen Williams in Beeston in Nottingham. It's 1932, with this massive cantilevered mushroom column construction, and a curtain wall, of course, and then this large packing hall in the center with these glass lenses resting on steel trusses, which then go down onto concrete mushroom columns. Or this work, very atypical, you know, this is 1935. It's the house in Mat by Le Corbusier Pierre Jeanneret, where he makes a break, you know, from his earlier work. Well, in fact, he'd made the break earlier because in 31 he designs this house never built for Errázuriz in Chile, which he is using, you know, Spanish tiles, rough timber with the bark removed, rough timber, rubble stone walls, etc. And here, a few years later, in 35, he builds this weekend house, which is a rubble stone construction, monopitch roof, tiles, wood framing, and so I think quite deliberately shows this work by him. And you know, what's fascinating is that the famous Villa Savoie, in 1929, he breaks completely with this language and moves towards this, you know, towards a kind of vernacular in a way, a kind of reinterpreted vernacular. And this house, which is by these figures, Lawrence Coker, Albert Fry, Long Island, New York. Fry is a Swiss immigrant. Coker, I think, was already there. And it's just one room weekend house raised on very thin tubular steel pilotis with sun blinds and glazing around the corner and roof terrace. It's almost Le Corbusier's 5 points of a new architecture, kind of, you know, yes. So it's a driving force because certain things are in common. The roof terrace, pilotis, not exactly fenêtre en longueur, but clearly there's a big influence. So the same date that they are working, of course, actually the house is finished in canvas and metal, of course, glass, etc., etc. It's machine material in a way. It's completely distinct from Le Corbusier's attempt to work with vernacular. And the reason why I started with this new architecture is because, well, because it remains a very important book to me, and because it also shows a kind of diverse modernity. You know, it's not, when you go from one building over 20 buildings, one to the next, the syntax of the constructional syntax is different, almost in every one, you know, slightly different inflection. So on the one hand, it is a kind of normative, it can be seen as a normative anthology. But on the other hand, it's very articulated, diverse, inflected. This I think, was always the attraction of this book. And it's interesting that the author analyzes each of the 20 in terms of technology, economic background, aesthetic, you know, and space, technique, aesthetic, economy. I mean, this whole presentation has a kind of embarrassing autobiographic aspect. That around 1992, I go to I'm visiting professor in Ticino in the Accademia di Arquitetura, started in Ticino by Mario Botta, and in Mendrisio, which is very close to Lugano. And I think I'm more or less visiting professor there for 8 years, going backwards and forwards. And I teach, or I try to teach studio, but also I give a kind of history theory thing. And at that time, Francesco Dalco is the main professor in that school, commuting from Venice, much easier commute than New York and Lugano. And so I have to do something that isn't quite the same as his stuff, because I'm not we more or less cover the same expertise. So I decided to, I worked on, in a way I was very influenced by this book of 1940 of Roth, The New Architecture. And this book is published in Italian by the press in Mendrisio. It's never been published in English. I hope it was written, of course, in English, and sadly given in English, but then translated more or less on the spot